Hello. My name's Nate Staniforth. I'm a magician, so of course I'm at a healthcare conference. I'd like to tell you about something very strange that happened to me a few weeks ago. One morning, I woke up and I went for a run, and I'm a runner. I like going for runs, so this was not an unusual thing for me to do. But on this particular day, I happened to go a little farther than usual, went a little faster than usual. It happened to be a really, really hot day. And as soon as I stopped, it was the strangest thing. It was as if a switch flipped in my body, and every muscle that I had went rigid immediately. It was like my entire body was cramping at one time. And as I hobbled back to my car, I realized two things very clearly. The first was that something had gone terribly, terribly wrong and that I needed to go to the hospital. The second was that this is not altogether a bad thing, because at least now I will have something to talk about at the Mayo Clinic Conference in a few weeks. Because, you know, I received this invitation to speak here on opening night a few months ago, and I said yes immediately. I mean, it's a huge honor to be here. I'm thrilled to be a part of this. And I had just assumed that at some point in that 2 or 3 month window, I would have been able to find a parallel between what you do and what I do. But as today got closer and closer and closer, I realized with this sort of mounting dread that I had agreed to speak to 1,000 healthcare professionals about the healthcare profession, and that I didn't know what to say. But as I sat in the hospital that day after the run and the misery, and as I reflected back on the two different experiences I had that day with two very different doctors, I realized that despite all of the obvious differences between what you do and what I do, despite the fact that we move in very different worlds and come from very different backgrounds, I grew up studying card tricks, and at least some of you ostensibly took real classes at some point. But if you can look past all of that, you understand that we share one essential challenge that faces both professions, and that is what I'd like to talk to you about today. But before I can do that, I want to acknowledge that when most of you think about magic, you think about laser beams and smoke machines and tight leather pants and top hats and rabbits, right? You were all very polite a moment ago with your applause as I walked out on stage, but that was definitely the sound of a room full of people not entirely sure why they're going to be hearing from a magician for the next 20 minutes. So if I'm talking about magic and you're picturing Job from Arrested Development, we are never going to understand each other. And so I'd like to take just a minute at the beginning and tell you a little bit about magic. One of the things you learn very early on as a magician is that the actual deception that's part of the magician's craft is actually the least interesting part of the job. The secrets to all of the illusions that magicians do, that's what everyone focuses on, but that's not the most interesting part. There's an illusion in my show. And the secret method, and I can tell you this, by the way, because you can watch my show knowing what I'm about to tell you, and you will have no idea what I'm talking about. You'd never see it in 1,000 years. But the entire secret to one of the illusions in my show is that I have a piece of double-stick tape, just Scotch tape, double-stick tape, on the right middle finger of my right hand, and the audience doesn't know it's there. But that double-stick tape allows me to do something that the audience perceives as impossible. And you'll forgive me for saying it's a really, really good illusion. I was performing this on stage I was in Danville, Virginia, and I had the piece of tape on my finger, and I was doing the thing that I needed to do, the secret thing, and so they see something impossible happen, and it is as if a lightning bolt slams into the theater. People jumped out of their chairs and one started screaming, and one guy climbed up on his chair and started shouting at the rest of the audience that I am the devil and they all need to leave as quickly as they can. You've seen this before. I mean, maybe you've seen magic on TV, or maybe you've seen good magic live. When people see something that they think is impossible, they just go crazy, right? And really, that is the appropriate response, right? If I were to stand in front of you right now and just disappear, that would not entertain you at all. That would scare the crap out of you, right? The appropriate response to that would not be applause. It would be to get out of your chair and to run from here as quickly as possible. And maybe as you left, there would be some sort of quiet, secret joy that maybe the world is bigger than you thought it was a second ago. But that initial shock would be far more like the time you decided to go skydiving than it would be like the time you saw a comedian at the office Christmas party. It would be wild and visceral and overpowering, and that is the experience of magic. And so deception is really, that's not the most interesting part of the job. The fascinating thing about magic is that you can take something as simple as a piece of double-stick Scotch tape. I mean, that is about as ordinary and as uninteresting as it can get. But with that, you can build something as vast and as grand as the experience of magic and mystery and wonder. Now, that's fine as an ideal. That's fine as an objective. It's fine as a mission statement or a battle plan. But on stage, all that ever matters is what you're able to bring to life for the audience. Your notebooks can be filled with the most beautiful, insightful theories on magic and magicians and what a magician could be. But unless you can take all of that and put it into a form that the audience can understand, it doesn't matter. It doesn't exist. They don't understand it. At a magic show, very few exceptions, the audience doesn't know anything about magic. They just came to the theater to have a good time. And so part of my job is to take all of the years that I've worked on magic. I started doing magic when I was 8. I didn't really get serious about it until I was 10 or so, but I just became obsessed. So the goal is to take all of that experience and all of that study and all of that effort and find a way to bring all of that to bear on one moment and one experience that the audience can appreciate. The challenge is that when you're on tour, you're in a different city every night. And you're spending most of the day just traveling across the country to get to the next show. And when you're doing that 100 times a year and you show up in Watchapeka, Kansas to do the 101st show on a Tuesday night, the temptation absolutely is to just sort of unplug and put it on autopilot because you've done it hundreds of times before and you'll do it 100 times in the future. But that never works. It never works. Whenever I try and do a show on autopilot, it's always a disaster. Because the goal is not to do the show. It's not to do just this set order of magic tricks. It's to take the show and to take the magic tricks to give the audience the experience of magic. There's a world of difference between technically completing a task and achieving the goal that the task was supposed to achieve in the first place, right? And so whenever I fake it, it doesn't work. Whenever I just show up, it doesn't work. And the difference between a good show and a bad show is when I can find a way to communicate with the audience that they can understand. When I can meet the audience where they are and find a way to take them from there to where I want to lead them. And I was thinking about all of this when I was sitting in the hospital that day because of the two doctors I saw. The first doctor was terrible. I saw him for 5 minutes, which is fine. I understand doctors are busy and schedules are tight, so 5 minutes is fine. But he only saw me for 2 minutes. He walked into the room and immediately sat down at the computer and started typing and didn't look up. So I thought that's a strange way to say hello, but that's probably my chart. He probably has a lot of ideas about my case and what's happened to me. I'm assuming he's putting all of his ideas into the system and then we'll get to talk about them. But he finishes typing and he looks up and he says, "So, Nick," which is not a great start because my name's Nate. And then he says, "You know, your CK is moderately high. I don't want to call it rhabdomyolysis, but I just want to keep a really close eye on this. So hang in there." And then he got up and left. And as he's walking towards the door, he sort of turns and asks, "Do you have any questions?" And then what I wanted to say is, yes, all of it. What are you talking about? What do you mean? What is my CK? I didn't even know I had a CK level. What does it mean that it's moderately elevated? How come I can go running 6 days a week and the one time I go a little faster, I end up in the hospital? What do you mean, do I have any questions? Sit down. But I don't say any of that, and he goes away. So I would be just terribly discouraged with my experience, except for the second doctor that I saw that day. And he was extraordinary. He walked in and he sat down directly in front of me. And I only saw him for 5 minutes too, so it's not like I spent more time with one than the other. But the second doctor explained everything that was happening. He answered every question that I had. It was as if I had all of his education and all of his expertise and all of his experience. The entire breadth and scope of his knowledge as a doctor was at my disposal for 5 minutes. I asked him every question I could think of. At the end, I was just making up questions to see if he could answer them. But when he left, I knew what was wrong. I knew what was happening. And I knew what I needed to do to get better. And now I'm fine. Now, I'm certain that the first doctor was a very knowledgeable, very kind, very well-intentioned man. But I'd like to just suggest that on that day and in that moment, he had a bad show. Because he forgot that people don't go to the hospital just to be seen by a doctor, as if what we really want is to just bask in the Hippocratic glow for a moment, right? People go to the hospital to get answers, and to get treatment, and to get better. And while that absolutely does happen in the lab and in the pharmacy and in the operating room, it also happens face to face, person to person, moment to moment, by directly and deliberately communicating. Now, I'm aware of the audacity of a magician talking to a room full of healthcare professionals about the best way for a patient to speak to a doctor. And I also know that when I have a bad day at work, the show doesn't go well, and when all of you have a bad day at work, the stakes are much higher. But I'd like to just suggest that, like an audience at a magic show that doesn't know anything about magic, most of the patients at all of your institutions are like me. They know nothing about medicine. And anything you can do, whether you're an administrator or a nurse, or whether you're the doctor in the room sitting across from the patient, anything you can do to bridge the terrifying gulf between all that you know and all that they don't will make their experience much, much better. Thank you.